In this video, I'm going to show you a presentation generation automation that is worth creating a SaaS business around. So this is going to be an absolute blast because you see the automation here. It's crazy. There is a lot going on here, and I'm going to show you how it works and how you could potentially implement it for yourself and use it to build a SaaS solution around it. But before we do that, let's look at what this thing in the end is going to create for us. And it creates a presentation within minutes. And this is just an example of a presentation that it created for me. So the impact of AI in financial markets. It created this table of contents. Then it created the image as well as the slide text. And here we have even a flow chart. Then we have a graph that also displays some numbers and stuff. So that's pretty cool. So that's also something that is researched using Perplexity AI. So we're using Perplexity to get real-time data and also citations, as well as some other tools in order to create, for example, this flowchart. And then this flowchart is a little more readable, but basically what you could do is you could use this tool to create, let's say 50 slides or so, and then take the best 30 or whatever, or you can edit them manually. So you have full control over it. You have the entire presentation that you can then edit to your liking. Okay, so here are some more graphs, and interestingly enough, at the end you get the references. So these are all the URLs where the data comes from that is displayed, and it is coming from the Perplexity module. Okay, and in the end you have this thank you slide. So what are the things that you need in order to build this automation? Well, first of all, you will need a template. So this is just an example template that you could use where you have the title, where you have the presented by, first name, last name, and all surrounded by double square brackets, not square, but curly brackets. Then you have the table of contents with the index. So here, this is where all of the index data is going to be then filled, as you can see here. So I'm just using this index here as a placeholder so that I have a variable that I can then use and make in order to fill it with data. And the same goes for the content image as well as the content title. So we have the content image, content title, and finally the content. And then as the last item, we have the references, because I also, as I showed you, wanted to have the references. So in case you want to check where the data came from and where the information in general came from. And finally, this thank you page. So now let's look at the form that we're going to use for that. So I've created this form, very simple, slide hive, create customized presentations in minutes. And you can obviously make this look nicer, use a different type of form, but I just love using Airtable forms because they allow me to trigger automations once somebody submits them. And that just makes my life easier because I use Airtable as a database for all of the entries in the end anyways. So here, once you enter first name, last name, email, presentation title, and then you tell more about what the presentation should be about, you click submit, and then this automation is triggered. So how about we just run it once? Therefore, let's go ahead and wait for new data, start the automation, and then I will need to activate the automation in the Airtable setup. I will show you what the automation looks like in a bit as well. And then we just need to create an entry inside of the form. So I'm going to go ahead and do that. So I then just entered the data, why businesses need to implement AI automations to stay relevant. So this presentation is for a sales meeting where C-level managers should be convinced to invest into AI automation. It should use graphs and also display flowcharts. So let's submit that and let's go over to our automation here. So then the webhook should be triggered here because it's set up as the automation inside of Airtable. And there we are. It started the automation where it first of all creates a title page. Then it gets the presentation, sets a variable. So I need this variable so that I know which presentation to edit. Then it generates the table of contents. I need this text parser in order to clean up whatever ChatGPT is creating. So actually, well, we're going to go over that in depth in a bit. Then I create a slide from a template and I delete the slide. So thing is, when you are using a template slide, like for example, this one here, you don't need table of contents again. So once you filled up the table of contents once, you can get rid of the table of contents template slide. Okay, so that's what we are doing in here. Then the next branch starts. So here we are basically getting the record, the contents, the TOC that were created up here. And then we go into this ChatGPT, which then creates the entire presentation text, the individual slide text, so to speak. Here are then the individual images that are created and added into the presentation slides. And once that is done, then it creates the flowchart using the same API that we used in the school communities AI automation masterclass. So I created an AI automation masterclass with Airtable and Make, and there we are using the same API. We're going to go into that in a bit as well. So here we're creating the flowcharts, and we're creating multiple ones, and then we're putting the flowcharts into the Google Slides. Then we do the same thing down here for the graphs. So we get the graph information from Perplexity, and Perplexity then gives us the citations as well. So in the top direction here, or top part here, that's where we actually create the flowchart, and in the bottom part, that's we are creating the citations. And once we have all of the citations, we just need to put them together down here. We add them into the citations page or the references page, which is this down here. And finally, we delete all of the template files or template slides that we don't need anymore. We get the URL where we can find the presentation. We store the URL link inside of Airtable, and we send out an email to the user with the presentation. So whatever we entered in the form. So let's look at the data, and we will see that I created this presentation, why businesses need to implement AI automation. Then this was the description that I added. And then this is the contents. So this is the TOC that is created by ChatGPT. And finally, we have the presentation link. So this is the presentation link. We can directly jump to it, and we will see that it created this presentation. Maybe it's still in the process of creating the presentation, but we can already look at it. But yeah, it looks like the presentation creation is done. It takes around 3 to 4 minutes to create this presentation with 10 slides. And I also limited it to 10 content slides. So here you see it's the title that I gave it, presented by the first name and last name that I entered. Then these are the table of contents that it came up with. Here's the slide 1, slide 2 with some graph, another slide with images, another graph, a third graph, and then the overview of AI-powered workflow automation, finally a flowchart, and then another graph. So there we are, another flowchart, and finally the references. All right, so that is our starting point for the presentation. Now let's look at how we can build this automation. But before we do that, just one quick note about the graphs. Right? Some graphs are not going to be 100% descriptive. So this one, for example, it says decrease error rates, and it looks like the error rates were at 0 before AI and they are at 0 after AI. But that's just because we have this productivity growth of 10x with the use of AI. And if you want to know more about this graph and where it comes from, you just need to go into the references and check out the references from there. And also, this graph here, ROI and cost reduction, to put them together onto the same slide is really difficult because the ROI is measured in percent and the cost reduction in full dollars or euros. So this ends up looking like there is no ROI, even though the ROI might be anything from 300-400% or whatever. So that's something you can definitely improve in terms of the graphs. But overall, as I said, I would recommend just creating 50 slides and take the best ones and then put that together. So now that we have the presentation, let's look in depth as to how to build out this presentation. So I'm not going to build it step by step with you because that would take forever. This would be like a 3-hour video. So because there's a lot going on here, I will create a tutorial in depth as to how to use Google Slides in general inside of Make. But I'm going to show you how this automation works, and you can download the blueprint. So I will export this blueprint and make it available to you so that you can download it and just import it. And that will save you a lot of time of manually creating this thing. It would take forever. So you can get the template inside of my community here, inside of the AI automation specialist community. You can find the link in the description below, and then you can join in and you can get access to not just this particular automation template, but a bunch more. So we have created a landing page analyzer so far, a competitor analyzer, an image database, which is really valuable because it takes forms and then it analyzes the forms and takes out the information and puts the right information at the right spot in a database. Then a TLDR custom newsletter that you can create, as well as a product research AI that is really valuable as to finding out what the right product is for your business. So to create next or to build. So then let's go back here. So what do we start with? We start with this webhook, and this webhook will be triggered once this automation is run. So we have this automation here where I say when a record is created, and this is happening every single time that we enter something into the form. So whenever we submit a form, a new entry is created inside of this database here. So inside of this table. Okay, and what we can do is we can go ahead and make sure that we save our time from creating a form entry. We can also just duplicate the record from here. That will then also trigger this event. Okay, so let's look at this script here. The script is very simple, one could say. So let's look at it. It really just fetches the parameters from the puts them into the webhook and triggers the webhook. So here we say let params input config, and what this will do is it will take all the variables that we have here on the left hand side. I'm going to go over them in a second. And then it says await fetch, and that's where it uses the individual variables from here. So from the params, which is this input config, what we get. From the params, it gets the webhook URL, it gets the record ID, the base ID, and the table ID. Okay, so you can just copy this code and put it into use for yourself. And what are all of these things? What is the webhook URL? What is the record ID? What is the base ID and the table ID? Well, the record ID is something we get directly from the creation of a new record. So whenever we create a new record in here, so a new line, so to speak, then this automation will be triggered and we load the record ID in. So the record ID is the ID of the individual row inside of your database. And each database can have multiple different tables. So currently I'm in the presentation table, and this here is the table ID for my given presentation table. And this here is the base ID. Okay, so I am passing the base ID and the table ID with the webhook. Why am I doing that? Well, because this way I can use it inside of my automation very easily. I can just say, you know what, give me this webhook with the record ID, base ID, table ID, and I can read all of these details easily. So I can just go ahead and say, okay, base ID, table ID, and record ID. And by doing so, I can retrieve all the information about that record. So about this record here. And I need that because I need to read the title as well as the description. So coming back to the automation, that's what we are doing here. So we're creating the title page, and the title page is this template here. So this template slide here where it says title, presented by, and so forth. So in order to then add that to our automation, we need to use the title, and I'm saying to ID title. So that will be the title of the Google slide itself. So we are creating a presentation from this entire template, not just from this one page, but from this entire template. But we want to change this one template slide first. So we need this entire template, which we get by using, by giving it a title. We are copying a presentation by dropdown. So here there are different options. I'm using dropdown here because I have this template inside of my folder Slide Hive. Okay, so you need to select your Google Drive connection, and therefore you need to be connected here. So you need to make sure that you add your connection and sign in. All right. And if you are using a business account, that will work very easily. If you don't use a business account, you should follow these instructions. So connect connecting to Google services using custom OAuth client. So it does work with personal accounts, but it's a lot more complicated, or you will need to set up a Google Cloud Console project and follow the instructions that you will find here. Okay, so once you have that, you can select values, and you will find that the values that you can see here are the values that are inside of this presentation that is in the folder Slide Hive and is called template. So that's the one that I selected here. So that's the presentation here. You see inside of Slide Hive, I can select all of the presentations, and the one that I want to have is this template, which is inside of, let me get out of here. There we are. So here we have all the presentations, and the template is the one that I want to use in order to edit it. Okay, so now I'm editing the title, the first name and the last name at this given step. So I'm creating the presentation and directly changing a few parameters. So what are those parameters? It's this one here for title, this one for first name, and this one for last name. So then once I have done all of that, I am making sure that I am storing this new presentation in my drive inside of the same folder. So now you can obviously select a different folder if you wanted to, but yeah, I'm putting it into the same folder. I'm making it a shared presentation, and I can click OK to make those changes. So once I made the presentation, I need to get the presentation, because that will allow me to then later on modify the presentation. It's just how you have to do it. It's a little annoying. It takes a little while, but that's just how it works. So you need to use get presentation here, where you use Google Slides and you get the ID from this module here. Okay, so this module gives you the presentation ID as the output, and you need to use this output in here in order to find the ID. And once you have the presentation, you can use the presentation ID as well as slide information in here. So you can set the variables. So we're using this tools module in order to set multiple variables. And let's see which ones it is. So I want to store the presentation ID. I want to store the index slide ID, the content slide ID, as well as the reference slide ID. And all of these I get from an array. So here, if you look at it, I get these slides from this array here. In my case, I have 5 slides inside of this template. Let's look at them. Actually, you can even click into them, and you will see that here the ID is changing. So this is the title ID or title slide ID. This here is the table of contents slide ID. And this one is the one for the, the content with image and title. Okay, so it changes every time you click into a new slide. This little number here, or this value, changes. And I want to get those 3 values. Why do I only care about those 3? Well, because I already changed the title slide. I don't care about the title slide anymore. I only change about, care about the table of contents ID, about this ID here, and this one. So if you had many different types of slides, which you can obviously do, you could extend this presentation to have like 10 different types of slides, not all of them having the image on the left-hand side. Maybe you have a type where the image is on the right-hand side or on top or whatever. So you would have to save all of those IDs at this given point. So you get them from this Google Slides output, and we store them in here. As you can see here, I'm already storing 2, 3, and 4. What are 2, 3, and 4? They are the slides 2, 3, and 4. You can obviously check it out manually. You can go to the presentation, to the template, and see which IDs those are and compare if they are the same. Then you will be sure. And that is because this 5th slide, I don't care about its IDs because it always just says thank you. And I don't care about the first slide because, well, it's already created. So I don't care about it. Okay. So at this point, I'm setting all of those variables so that I can access them later on. Then the next thing is, let's generate the COT. So this router, once it went through this top direction, it's going to go into the second routing. And here it's generating the contents, the TOC, the table of contents. So here, this is a general GPT chat completion, a very basic one where we have the role user, and it just says, I want to create a presentation on following topic and description as topic title, description. Now, obviously you can improve this template or this specific, prompt, but this is good enough for what we're doing. And I'm saying embed the list response in a markdown code snippet. So I do that so that I can then extract the content that comes out as markdown code snippet. And interestingly enough, I set the amount of topics to 10, which then creates 10 content slides. So if you want to change that, you can create a variable either inside of your database here. You could create an extra column. So here, insert left, and you could call this one amount of slides, for example. And you could make this a number, or just make it easier, simple line text. And you could say you don't want to have 10, but you want to have 15 slides or whatever, or 50 or whatever. Okay, so that is something that you would then set up in here. So you would set the variable in here. And that is our ChatGPT. So once ChatGPT is done, it gives us the result, which is this output. And you see it's surrounded by markdown, and this is the TOC. Okay, the table of contents. So I'm using this text parser in order to only get the text that is inside of markdown. And that's what I get with this regular expression. So this ChatGPT creates this markdown text, this result, and I just use that in here as a result text. And I use this pattern in order to have the output that will then only be the TOC text itself, which I can then update. So I'm updating my database, which means I'm updating this part here, contents. We could call it TOC or whatever. So I'm updating that. And then I'm, as you can see here, updating values. And then I get the variable. So I need to get the presentation ID and the index slide ID. Why do I need the index slide ID? Well, in order to update the TOC, which is my index slide. So I need this ID up here in order to now go ahead and add the content in here, so the TOC in here. Okay, so then we can delete the slide. So once we created the index, we can get rid of it. So here we set the presentation ID that we get from this tools module. We get the index slide ID, and we set the tags, or the tag index, to value. So whatever had the value, the tag as index, is replaced with whatever this value is. So this output here. So basically we're copying this part automatically, obviously, and we're putting it in here instead. Okay, so that's what happens technically. So then obviously automatically, and we don't have to do it manually. Then we delete the slide because we don't need it anymore. So we get rid of the duplicate. So because here we are creating a slide from a template slide. So we're creating a copy of it, then we're modifying the copy. So we can get rid of the original slide. And that's what we do in this part here. All right, now that we're done with that, we get the table of contents. So here we're accessing our record, and this record now has contents. Before it didn't have that. If we look at it here it didn't have contents. It only had title and description. But here it also has the contents because, well, we updated them up here. So now that we have that, we can set this send this information to this ChatGPT module, where we say, hey, this is the content, or the TOC, the table of contents. This is the title and this is the description. And now go ahead and create a JSON file with JSON objects containing the following keys. So we have the type string, where we have image, graph, flowchart. We have the title, which is string. We have the content, which is a list of strings. We have the image prompt, which is string, and strings are, by the way, text, and JSON is a way to display information in a structured format that we can then use. And a list is just multiple text pieces as individual text pieces. So as separate pieces of text that we can use separately. So then it creates images, it creates graphs, and type should be image, graph, or flowchart based on the prompt to be generated. And then the content should be of correct length to be included in each slide. Use simple text bullets as needed. Do not use any markdown styling. Do not use any delimiter or delimiter at the end of each string. And each separate line of content should be a separate string. So that's the prompt. Then we use this text parser in order to get rid of all the JSON output that we get, because here, if you look at the result, we get a big JSON output. So all of that. And each of those pieces here, so we have a bunch of JSON objects in here, and they have the type, they have the title of that slide, they have the content of the slide, and that's it. And then this image has, well, all of these content pieces, right? So where it says AI is transforming businesses across so-and-so. And then we have this other variable where we get the image prompt. So if the type is image, we need to have an image prompt, because we need to prompt ChatGPT with something. So this is the prompt that is used for that particular image. There is no graph prompt and no flowchart prompt because we are specifically creating an image. Then for the next slide, we have a graph. So the type is graph, the title is this, then there is a little bit of content, and then we have no image prompt content, but we have a graph prompt content. Okay, and then we have no flowchart prompt. Then we have another image slide, we have another graph slide, we have another graph slide, then we have an image slide, and finally we have a flowchart here, and then we have an image and a graph again and a flowchart. So basically, this is then creating the content that will then be used, or creating the objects that are then going to be broken down into these three areas. So into these three directions. So either generate an image or generate a flowchart or generate a graph set. Okay. So then what we're doing is we're taking this output here, which is a very big JSON file or JSON text, and we use that to parse it. So we put the value into this JSON string, and then we use this router that goes into this these three different directions. So this ChatGPT module now is actually generating the image. So here we're just using DALL-E 3, and obviously when DALL-E 4 comes out, we're going to replace that. But now we're just using the image prompt, and we're just saying, do not use any text inside the image. So once we generated this image, we will get an output. And you see we have 4 outputs, because if you look at this output here, inside of the JSON prompts, you see we had image 1, we had image 2, we had graph, image 3, and finally here we have image 4. So this is supposed to run 4 times. Okay, so it did run 4 times. Now we are setting the variables, we're getting the variables which we get from what we set up here. If you recall, we set the presentation ID as well as the content slide ID in here, right? The content slide ID is the ID of this content piece. So this one here. So we're just saying this slide has an ID. We want to use that ID. And you see, this explanation is already getting very long, but imagine we were building this out manually. This would take forever. So here we are then taking the presentation and the content slide ID, and we're replacing the tags, for example, content title or content 1 title, which is this part here. We're replacing this whole thing with whatever we get from the title. So where do we get this title from? We get it from this parse JSON. So here we have the type image, then we have the title. So we take this title and we put that into the title variable slot here. Okay, then we do the same thing with the content, and here we join content. So what do we do with joining content? Well, we're basically saying, you know what, content, which we get from this JSON object here, or JSON module here, is of type array. So it contains multiple items. It's not just one item, it's multiple items. So we put all of those together and we join them into one text. So we're just saying, hey, here inside of this content thingy, I want to have all of this stuff, for example, right? And we separate it with an empty line, all right? So coming back here, so we say, you know what, finish this statement 1 and then leave an empty space and then add the next item. And then we do the same thing with the image. So here an interesting thing is, and that is something that plagued us forever to debug because it's not intuitive at all, but we needed to replace this content image tag with an actual image. And in order to do so, we need to make it a string. So here we're saying toString content image tag. So we're converting this content image tag into an actual string because otherwise it would be treated like a variable. And well, actually, this is not where we're updating the image, sorry. What we're doing here is we are copying, or we are changing the tag of our presentation's copy of the slide. So let me show you. So here we have this slide, right? And what we do is we create a copy of it. So we're just saying, you know what? I have this copy now and I want to modify the copy. And in the copy, instead of this being called content image 1, I'm calling this content image tag or something like that. So here we're doing exactly that. And then in the next moment, we are replacing content image tag with the actual image. So we're getting the image URL from the generated image from this ChatGPT module, and we are storing it at this point here. Why are we giving it a specific name? because otherwise we would replace our template. And we don't want to replace the template. It should always stay content one image, because otherwise it would we would not have the template anymore to use again for a separate for another slide that has the same type, that also has an image in it. So that's what we're doing with those two steps, step 1, step 2. So these are the 2 steps. Then we are setting the variable. So this one here is a stop repeater. I'm using a repeater here because this can go wrong. So I am using an HTTP call here towards Grokey, and let me show you Grokey. If you want to know more about Grokey, you should definitely join the school community, because there I'm showing you in depth how to build a full automation using Grokey and all of that. So here Grokey allows you to create all kinds of graphs here. So you can create block graphs, mind maps, all kinds of graphs, as you can see here, right? And what we're doing is we're creating a graph that is this flowchart that we get in the end. So this one here, for example, this flowchart, this is a PNG, but the underlying flowchart is generated using Grokey, K-R-O-K-I, Grokey.io, this page. And what we're doing is we're creating a PNG with this post method, and we're sending a value here. So we're sending a request as plain text, as raw body type here. Basically, this is an API call, an HTTP request that we do towards this Grokey page. And where do we get this value from? Well, we get it from this text parser. And this text parser, we got the data for that from this flowchart generating ChatGPT module. So let's look into that real quick before we go into this repeater. Okay, so this generate flowchart automation, what it does is it takes the flowchart prompt and then it creates mermaid code. Okay, what is mermaid code? Well, mermaid code is the code that we can use for Grokey. There are different types of codes that we can use, and we're using specifically this one that is called mermaid. And using mermaid and the URL that we are using here, so this URL, mermaid PNG, then creates a flowchart for us, okay? So the problem now is, if we are using an API, things can go wrong. So we're accessing this website and let's say it just didn't work. The flowchart prompt that we gave, the mermaid code didn't work, or the HTTP request didn't work, or something like that. So in order to make sure that if it doesn't work, we try again, that's why we are using this repeater. So this repeater just tries it 3 times. So initial value is 1 and it repeats 3 times. And we set a variable before that. We say stop repeater false. So we set this variable to stop the repeater to false. If the stop repeater variable is true, then we are going to stop this repeater. So here you see we're starting the repeater and then we get the variable. So we're checking, do we stop the repeater variable? Well, we're checking this variable, stop repeater. If it's true, and that's where this filter comes in. If it's true, then we are stopping the repeater. And if it's false, then we're not stopping the repeater, okay? So that means that if this variable here that we're setting to false, then we go through this entire process. And if it's true, then we stop the process. So basically it stops here. So at this point, this is done, but then it stops and doesn't do all of these things anymore. And once that happens, then it will jump to the 3rd branch, which then will create the graph. But how do we set this variable, stop repeater, to true? Well, we set it to true once we were actually successful. So we set it here, we set it to true here, stop repeater, variable true. We set the variable, that's the value that you see here, rather small, but yeah. We set the variable once this HTTP request was successful. Because if it was successful, it's going to be going into the top branch. If it was unsuccessful, it's going to go into the bottom branch. So if it's unsuccessful, we want to try again. That's why we're saying stop repeater false. So try again. That's what we're saying. But if it was successful, it's going towards the top branch. It's going to basically deliver us a file. So you can see that here in the output, it creates data, buffer data, binary data. So this is quite complex, but in the end, basically with this binary data, you can create an image. So out of this text with the whole numbers, an actual image is created. But in order to create an image out of data, you need to use a module for that. And we're using this OneDrive module, which does just that. So it takes the data, it gives the file a name, we just give it the ID of whatever we get from ChatGPT as the output here. So if you look at ChatGPT, it gave us an output. So this is the flowchart. This is the mermaid code, by the way. So here you say mermaid, but then ChatGPT also gives us an ID somewhere, 69, that should be the one. So let me check. Oh yeah, that's the ID. So here inside, well, underneath results, that's the ID. So we give the image this ID as a name inside of here. And we convert this data that we get from this Kroki API call, we convert that into an actual PNG. So that's what this OneDrive setting does. So you need to add a connection to to OneDrive, which is from Microsoft. And once you did that, you will need to set up the settings as you see here, and able to enter no and so forth, and replace existing file if file already exists. And once that is done, then we can retrieve the file, because unfortunately, just putting the file there isn't enough. We actually also need to retrieve the file, because this doesn't give us a download URL. It just gives us the URL where the image is. But technically, and we tried it and it's really a pain, but technically you need to use this extra module here to actually download the file based on the file ID that you get from this OneDrive module. Okay, so this OneDrive module gives us the ID that we can use in this OneDrive module, and this one here, so that we can actually download the, well, get the download URL. So now we don't download the file, but we get the URL that we can use in order to download the file. So this is the URL that we get from there. And then again, we do the same thing that we did already in here. We get the presentation ID as well as the ID of the content slide. So content slide ID, if you recall, this one is the content slide. We get this ID and we then set it up here. So we change the content title to title, the content to content, but then here the content image to content image tag, we change that. And then finally, this is where we actually upload the image that we get from this Google Drive, OneDrive module. Okay, so we get the image URL, so the download URL from here, and we use it as the image URL for the slide that we're, well, for the image that we're uploading into the slide. So we're uploading an image by replacing text tag, and we're replacing the content one image tag. And then finally, we set the variable to stop the repeater to false. So once we're done with all of that, we are resetting this variable, because we don't need it here anymore for this iteration, but we will still need it down here. Actually, this also makes sure, this set variable, that if this process specifically goes wrong, so if for some reason uploading the image didn't work, then we set the variable to stop repeater false, and then in the end, it will try to run again. Okay, so that's why I put it there. I was wondering why it was there, but that was the reason. So then we have this bottom branch here. And here again, we set the variable. We just make sure that we stop the repeater. So the same process, we have this repeater, because this could go wrong. Well, actually, this part is the one that will go wrong the most likely, because obviously Perplexity could go wrong, but also this quick chart IO chart could go wrong. So let's go there. And actually not the chart URL, but this is quickchart.io. And this is a website where an open API that you can use for free to create charts. And you can see there are different types of charts that you can create, and you can make them nicer than the one that we have here. So what is going on here? Well, we are using this repeater again. We get the variable. Do we stop the repeater? Yes or no? And we check here, check the error. So if things go right, we keep going. If things go wrong, we stop doing it. Okay. So then we use this Perplexity AI connection, and well, I'm using the Sonar large model. Now, obviously you can use different models here and use the one that works best for you. And here we're just saying generate a detailed data set for the following prompt, scraping online articles. So then we have this graph prompt, which again, we get from here. So specifically, we get it from here, from this one, where we had this graph, and this graph has a title and has a graph prompt where it says a graph showing companies using AI, automation versus marketing, competitiveness over time, showcasing an upward trend. So that was the graph prompt that was created for us. So we're just saying, hey, use this graph prompt and give me the data in the following format. Okay. So once we did that, we will get an output, and the output will contain the citations. So these are the URLs where it got the data from, as well as the choices down here and the message content. and then it gave me this JSON code. Okay, this JSON code allows me to then create a diagram or a graph. So we take this JSON code and we use it inside of here. So at this point, we need to parse it. So we're saying, hey, just take the JSON code out of this output that we just looked at. Just give me the JSON text or the JSON code. Okay. So here we had this JSON part. So we have a bunch of text before, we have a bunch of text after, but we are only interested in whatever is between this JSON starting and these dashes that are ending it. So we just want to have this part here. And that's what we need this text parser for, which just takes this choices content and then it cleans it up, just giving us the JSON. We then put this JSON and we give it to our chart with this get request. So we use this URL here, quickchart.io/chart. We pass in the value that we get from this text parser, and that's it. And then this one will generate data for us again. So as we saw earlier, if we want to make an image out of data, we need to use OneDrive, for example, here. So that's what we do. We use this OneDrive to create an image based on the data, and then we get the file from the ID that we get from here. And in between, we have this stop repeater true, because at this point, we know that we were successful. Then we need these tools in order to get the presentation and content slide ID. So the same thing that we did here. Okay, so we get those that we stored up here. So in here, we stored all of these details, right? All of those IDs. And now we are just taking the template ID. We are creating a slide from the template ID. So here, presentation ID, content slide ID. We're replacing the tag content title with title, content with content, and finally the content image with this new tag that we then in this step here override or replace with the download URL, which then will create the image for us, which will then create this, well, upload the image for us. So it doesn't create the image, but it does put the image in here. All right. And then finally, we set the stop repeater to false again. So we want to make sure that if something goes wrong in this process here, try once more. So just go through the repeater again. And by the way, if this went well, the creation, we want to go towards top branch. If this didn't go well, we want to set the stop repeater to false. We don't want to stop the repeater. We want to repeat again. So then we have a final branch, well, almost final branch here. So this branch here, it gives us all the citations. So here we extracted only the JSON, right? So this module here gave us a bunch of output, this Perplexity module. And by the way, you will need to create a module, an API here. Well, use the Perplexity AI API if you don't know how to do that. I'll probably make a video about that as well. But you just go to Perplexity, you create an account with them, you subscribe to their paid model, paid products, and then you get $5 worth of API tokens to use. Okay, why do we need that? Well, the thing is, the ChatGPT module in Make doesn't give us the citations yet. It doesn't give us an output about the citations yet. So the references where it got the information from. Once that is going to happen as well, we won't need to use Perplexity for this, but right now we do. Okay, so then we have the stop repeater again, and here we check the error with checking. Do we want to stop the repeater or do we not want to stop the repeater? And based on that, we get the citations. And the citations are inside of choices, inside of the content, and we just use it using this or get it using this pattern. So we need this text parser with global match yes, case sensitive yes, multi-line yes, single line no, continuous execution no, and then using this pattern right here. So this will give us the choices message content, which will then, if you look at it, give us, well, this is the input, and there we had an output. In the first one we didn't have one, so here we had an output, and the output is this URL, that URL, and finally that URL. So using this pattern, we got the URLs from the citations from here, all of these. That's what we want. We want to get those citations, and then we set the variable references, or we get the variable references at this point, and we set the variable references. And the variable references we set as references value. So why do we need to do that here? Well, the thing is, we want to get all the references together. And once we get all of the references, then we want to put them into a slide. That's why we're creating them in this final branch down here. So this branch will be run at the very end. So once all of the other branches are done, then this branch will be run. And in this branch, what we're doing is we are, well, first of all, getting all the variables again. So we're getting the reference slide ID and the content slide ID, as well as the presentation ID and the references as well, by the way. So that's why we created them. And then we create a slide from templates. Here we create the references slide. So we duplicate this slide right here. This one, we duplicate this slide. Then we delete the slide that was the content slide. So once we're done creating all of the content, so meaning all of these content pieces, and we are, let's say at this point, we don't need any more content slides, but this template slide, this one would still be in there. So what we're saying is delete this content slide, this template content slide. And then we do the same thing with the reference slide ID, because we already filled it up here. Okay, we filled the references in here. We duplicated the references slide. We filled the information. Now we can get rid of the references slide as well. And then here, that's where we're using Google Drive again. And this one is a little tricky. So here you will need to unmap. You want to get the folder where you have stored your presentation. And then you click on map. So here you now have the ID. And then you click or you go slash. And then let me cancel the change. And then you need to enter the presentation ID. So you see, I first got this one by unmapping, so deactivating this map here. Then I selected the folder where I want to put it, and then I say presentation ID. So this is where we are storing the presentation ID, and we get the share link. So here we're not actually storing it here, we are just getting it here. But we stored it when we created it all the way up here. So that's why we are creating the presentation from a template. So once we're done with that, we are storing the URL in here. So we're storing the presentation link, which is this share link that we get as output from this Google Drive. And finally, we are sending an email where you just set up your email or Gmail account, and then you can send an email where I just say, hey, here, this is the HTML code in order to, well, you give me also the presentation link, and we style